Thank you, and welcome, as mentioned, to the OAS podcast. I'm Dr. Paul Karpecki. I practice in Lexington, Kentucky, and I have the privilege of getting to interview some of the more interesting individuals in the field of eye care, both from an industry standpoint and from a professional standpoint, such as ophthalmologists and optometrists. So I have really the whole gamut. And today I have one that covers kind of two. Dr. Barry Linder is an ophthalmologist by trade, but also the CEO of Eyedetec. That's a company that's got some very exciting technology that's near fruition here, near toward the end of its availability to all of us, that I think is extremely exciting. I think it really might be the superior technology, or I really believe it is, in the class of these thermal expression technologies that exist. So Barry, welcome to the OAS podcast. Wonderful to have you here.
Thank you, Paul. Pleasure to be here.
For those who don't know you, and I know you have a lot of people who do over the years, but can you walk us through a little bit of your personal background, growing up, education, your professional path into, let's say, just to ophthalmology first, to becoming an ophthalmologist, and then maybe on the second part we'll get into your progression from an ophthalmologist into an entrepreneur, because I know there are a lot of listeners who are in that situation, have great ideas, and what's the path there? But let's start with your background first.
Sure. Well, I was actually born and raised in rural Massachusetts, and ended up going to MIT, got a degree in electrical engineering, which was great. I did a master's in biomedical engineering, loved it, except decided I didn't like working for doctors. I was at the Brigham for a number of years back then, and my solution was to become one. So I then went to WashU and did all my medical training there. And during that time period, I was involved in research on a number of different kind of projects, some of which were actually space medicine. This was near the beginning of the space shuttle program. Space motion sickness was a big issue. And I got to know one of the shuttle astronauts very well, and we did some in-flight experiments, and much of it had to do with visual vestibular interaction. And I was, at that point, it was interesting professional decision. I had to decide, was I going to orient my career towards optimizing my chances of becoming an astronaut, or doing what I wanted to do in medicine? And if I became an astronaut, great. So I actually got interviewed twice, in 1989 and 91. Spent a week in Houston getting poked and prodded and tested, and 1 hour of the 40-hour week was spent at a table with about 8 or 9 astronauts doing the formal interview. I got within 2 heartbeats of getting selected, didn't quite get there, but all of that led me to really appreciate the visual system and how central it is to so much of our life, that I ended up going into ophthalmology.
Wow, what an interesting pathway. I guess you could have almost been an astronaut, which is pretty amazing in of itself, at the engineering and anyway, in ophthalmology. And did you practice for a while? Was it we were very quickly into this entrepreneurial level, or kind of take us through the professional pathway from the time you went through ophthalmology?
Yeah, I worked for about 10 years as a practicing ophthalmologist at Kaiser Permanente in Oakland. And what that did, though, was give me a great organization to work in, where I had the opportunity to do a lot of different things. And that was kind of the spark of the thought of going and becoming an innovator, because I did a number of management roles there, managing our department. We were the largest eye department in Kaiser. I became an assistant manager there, and then the corporate office of Kaiser was right nearby. So I started doing some disease management work at the time, not in eye care, but just overall in their program. And electronic medical records were really taking off, so I got involved in that, and some international business development in Singapore. And this was sort of the height of the first internet boom. And someone came to me and asked if I'd be interested, and I kind of thought I either stay at Kaiser for my career or I branch off. And so I took the opportunity and kind of jumped into being an entrepreneur.
That's great. And was your initial entrepreneurial initiatives, I mean, you're involved in EHR and all of that sort of stuff, and it was the time that whole area was coming in, but prior to, let's say, Eyedetec, where coming up now with awesome technologies for ocular surface disease, MGD, dry eye, and we'll get into the Eye Lipid Mobilizer. And I love that name too, because it really is what separates this technology from everything else in mobilizing the lipids. But was that a plan that came along later and then you started the company, or were you already thinking of this during your time while you were at Kaiser?
No, that's a really interesting question, because the truth is, I day in and day out, as we all do in practice, see patients with dry eye disease, and almost all of them had MGD. And so at the time, I would do my best. It's okay, take this washcloth, run under hot water, go home and do it. And of course, they would come back, still have the problem, and recognize that no one, and I myself tried it. And no one can do that for more than maybe once or twice the way it's supposed to be done. And so it kind of was just a little memory spot where I thought there's got to be something better. I didn't launch into that as my entrepreneurial pathway, though. I actually got involved in pediatric ophthalmology with the RetCam, a company called Clarity, and actually after that, cataract surgery and Holos, which was a real-time aberrometer for premium channel IOL selection and positioning. So I did a variety of things, but on the back burner, kind of as I looked at what were some of the biggest problems doctors had in taking care of patients, and patients being successful at something, I always came back to dry eye. And so that was when I started the company. I actually started with a very simple, kind of mild MGD treatment, because again, the thing I was faced with all the time was a washcloth. And so I thought, well, the easiest replacement for that was something called EyeGenie. And that's a commercial product today that is a reusable eye mask and single-use calibrated warming wafers to deliver the right temperature for the right time. But it also became really clear that that was very helpful for a segment of the population, but was not going to be a complete answer. And we really needed more of an ecosystem to take care of the full range of disease. And so I started the company, started filing patents around the more advanced technology, which, as you say, today is the Eye Lipid Mobilizer.
That is terrific. What, for those listeners, and we'll get a little more into the technology in a moment, there's a lot of eye care providers that listen in to this podcast, and some have, they're pretty entrepreneurial if they're listening in, because that's kind of what we focus on, is innovation, innovative individuals, entrepreneurial people. So they may have an idea to come up with, that this could have great legs. When's the time to make the transition, especially when you're doing very well, in terms of, as an ophthalmologist practicing within a big group like Kaiser, to make the full transition? Or do you recommend people make kind of a partial transition beforehand? Or what's the path then? Because I get that question a fair amount, and you've had all the paths to get to where you're at now. What would you recommend to someone listening in who's in a situation like you were, a decade or so ago?
Yeah, that's probably the hardest question of all you could ask, because there is no one answer, and it depends so much on the individual. So are you a risk taker? I would say, if I had to say one thing, if you have a family and you have a spouse, make sure they're really supportive and that they are 100% in whatever decision you make, because it's typically a long road. I mean, we all hear about the success stories, but along the way, there's a lot of trials and tribulations, and it can take a long time. Now, some in Silicon Valley talk about fail fast, and that is an approach. And that again, it's very individual. Some personalities fit that perfectly. Mine was not. I'm going to succeed slowly, but I'm going to get there. And again, it takes a big support network around you to be able to do that. So again, there's really no one answer. I've kind of taken longer, I would say, on this road, because I was a little less, or I should say, I'm more risk averse than maybe average, and so I would have a position and ensure that everything above table, that I could at the same time be developing some IP and prepare to really launch the next company. And some would say, well, it's better to just, dive in 100% and either succeed or fail within a few years. For me, it's that wasn't the approach I wanted to take. And so there's no one answer. It really depends a lot on one's personal attitudes, approach to risk, how much of a risk taker one's going to be, and commitment, because it's a hard road.
That's a great answer. Really, really wonderful insight. And I appreciate you sharing that, Barry. Is excellent. Take me through now your Eyedetec. You mentioned EyeGenie. You mentioned the ELM, the Eye Lipid Mobilizer. Take us through those technologies. I love how you came up with them. The companies that succeed are those like yours who find a real need and then say, hey, there's something here that needs to be taken care of for patients in a field like dry eye in this case, and then get to the next level. And this is not a Me Too product. I think the missing element of why some of the procedures, although they did pretty well, your in-office procedures, the thermal expression, things along those lines, I think they're missing that vibrational mobilizing component, that technology to have that huge impact that could be paired with anything else or be a standalone product plus what they take home. So I thought, your innovation is your innovative mind is definitely there, and it came through. And as I said, I believe this has the most potential of any in the field of in-office procedures from my own experience. So those are the main two products within the company. Is that kind of the main structure? Or take us through the company Eyedetec first.
Sure. Totally focused on dry eye, and as a result, MGD is really what we're focused on. And in thinking about launching a product, of course, it has to work for the patient. So it's got to be effective. But there also has to be a business model around it that works. So affordability is key for the patient, and also for the provider. The doctor needs to be able to do this. I mean, we all need an income. We all need to make money and survive. And so it's got to work for the whole ecosystem. And so everything that I do, it has those factors in mind. How is this going to work? And people aren't just going to change everything just because we have some interesting technology. It has to work. It has to fit the business model. So you asked about EyeGenie. I just happen to have my
great
at hand all the time. And like I said, it's a reusable eye mask, and then the single-use disposable warming wafers that we calibrate to that particular mask. And here, the key thing was convenience. Like I said, starting out with that warm, wet washcloth, it would never work because who has the time to run it underwater, put it on, and then keep it at the right temperature for at least 5 minutes? And with this, we achieve close to 15 minutes within a therapeutic range. So it's almost impossible for anyone, even the best intentioned patient, motivated patient, to do 15 minutes. And so that was the whole push behind EyeGenie. Let's get something that is convenient and easy to use, and no matter where the patient is, they can use it. So if they're traveling, they're flying, when it's very, very convenient. But it's for mild disease. And as you mentioned, the Eye Lipid Mobilizer we've been building a very strong patent portfolio around it. So we started thinking, what were some of the key things? Well, we had to find a technology that was effective, but also affordable and also convenient. So kind of starting backwards, well, how can we make this convenient? It's got to be something where I don't just go for a one and done treatment in the doctor's office. I can't break the bank with an incredibly expensive treatment at the doctor's office. Maybe I can start that way, but if I have to go back every 6 months, that's definitely not a long-term winnable solution. So we said, let's start with a treatment at the doctor's and then personalize this for the patient to use at home. And that was from the kind of the business modeling thought, that was what was the driver. And then we said, well, okay, we want to do that, but again, it has to be affordable. So that then led us into ensuring that the technology ideas were going to fit that overall model of, again, effectiveness, yes, but affordability and convenience. So we then came up with this prototype of what's called the Eye Lipid Mobilizer, or ELM. And we had to think about what was going to be unique. So like you said, almost all thermal and expressive technologies tend to be somewhat uncomfortable. They're somewhat invasive and definitely expensive, both capital equipment expense for the practice, but then also very expensive for a patient, knowing that this is a chronic disease. Nothing that we know of cures it. So the thought there was, okay, we know heat lowers viscosity of meibum. So we said, let's have heat, but then what else could we do? And rather than expressing where we're applying a force and hoping we're pressing at the right place and the meibum is going to come out the orifice, whereas sometimes you may actually have retrograde movement of meibum, which can cause further damage. We said, let's make this comfortable and use a different approach. And that's where the concept of vibration to induce shear thinning. Now, shear thinning is not something most practitioners think of in general, but we actually all have experience in our lives of materials that undergo shear thinning. Probably the most common is ketchup. For those who remember when ketchup was in glass bottles, not plastic, you would bang on the bottom, and then all of a sudden your hamburger would get covered with ketchup. And that's because that force induced shear thinning of the ketchup, and it liquefied and then mobilized. Also, hillsides in an earthquake that all of a sudden liquefy and become a mudslide is an example. Toothpaste, you can hold it all day, but as soon as you apply a force, that then liquefies as well. Paint is another very common example of a fluid that undergoes shear thinning. So it turns out meibum, or the lipids in the Meibomian glands, are very typical of fluids that undergo shear thinning. They're called non-Newtonian fluids. So we added a vibratory force to these iPads. And then that itself is very effective. But we thought we could induce the active expression by activating the lacrimal function unit. And so we used the same iPads and the same mechanical vibration to activate through stimulation of a branch of the fifth cranial nerve at the nasal bridge, active expression from the Meibomian glands. So it's kind of a 1, 2, 3 punch, if you will. And we do this with a device that is customizable. The iPads themselves move in and out, left and right, and we adjust that to each individual's anatomy. What I showed you there was our first prototype. This is what we are in final steps of developing right now. That will be the way the product looks. So in the doctor's office, the shield will come off. This will get fit to the face. Patient goes home with a customized fitted device that they then use at home under the doctor's direction. The one other element of this, again, back to convenience and ensuring compliance, is that this has Bluetooth in it, and the apps that will go along with this will allow remote therapeutic monitoring of the patient at home to ensure that they're following the prescribed frequency of use. And on the app, we'll be able to track symptoms. So we'll have whatever the doctor prefers, the speed score, OSDI, whatever their set of questions are. So we'll be able to be following how well the patient's doing, how well they're tracking, and provide positive reinforcement for when they're doing well or encouragement to do something different. One other thing I would say is, for some patients, this may be all they need, but I also obviously recognize, again, this is a complex disease, multifactorial, and often it's not just thicken meibum, but there may be inflammatory elements. So it's not to say this will be the only intervention. I think it will be highly synergistic with other technologies, anti-inflammatory drops, for example, which may be needed to control the acute inflammatory flare and then control the disease with this on an ongoing basis at home. And we do this affordably. It's effective. We have clinical data showing that it's effective. And obviously it's convenient because the patient can do this treatment where and when they choose.
I think that's fantastic, Barry. And a lot of differentiators. This is not just anything like the current thermal in-office treatments. The vibrational shear stress effect is so enormous too, and how it allows that to come out. That is always fascinating me. It takes it to a whole other level. They may provide a little even neurostimulation. You never know based on the way that it kind of works. But and also the fact that patients can take this home differentiates it from anything else. Cost and positioning differentiates it. And I agree with you. Now we're finally targeting the root cause of the majority of dry eye disease as opposed to just the inflammation. And although it is good to have these as compatible in the acute phase, I mean, ultimately you want patients to be producing their own ideal meibum. So where's the technology currently in terms of approval process at this point, Barry?
We are preparing a 510K. We have gone through the classification, so we know what that is. We have our clinical study data written up in the form it needs to be for the 510K. So the pieces are all coming together, and we'll be submitting that this year. So our hope is we have regulatory clearance before the end of the year. And we are looking at two pathways in terms of reaching the market. Obviously, we can do this ourselves, or we can find a commercialization partner. My preference is the latter. So we are talking with companies, looking at who would be ideal commercialization partners. And along the way, we're bringing in additional capital to ensure if we go it alone, we have the ability to do that. And if we find a partner that will have the product fully ready to go, again, by end of the year, early next year. And we've identified a contract manufacturer that is based in the US who can start small and scale very rapidly through their network of sub manufacturers.
It's very exciting. Yeah, it's nice when you can finally see the finish line. At least still got to finish that last part of the marathon, and especially in the approach you took. But I like that conservative approach. I think it allows you to take the extra time, measure twice, cut once kind of area, and I think you've done it really well. I mean, even the look of the technology is so impressive. It reminds me much more of kind of like an Apple product, where just even the look of it just entices you, and you've achieved that. So all those little details obviously have all been addressed, and sometimes taking the time to do that is key. What would you say, before we kind of go through the last little part of this, what would you say are some of the things that have helped you to reach this success as an entrepreneur? Is it just the time? Is it surrounding yourself with key people? What are the key things that allow someone to take an idea and get to where you're at today with a viable, approved product by the end of the year?
Absolutely ensuring one is surrounded by a team that are among the best. And that's what I think I've done. I mean, I have some of the best dry eye experts in the world on our advisory board, providing advice on a regular basis. And then on the business side, also, I would be the first to say I don't have all the answers, but if I surround myself with people who have been there, have answers, that's what I need. And so it's almost, people say all the time in a way, but it truly is the team that makes the difference. I mean, you need to have a good idea, no doubt, but the team helps shape that and helps understand the day-to-day workings in the practice and how we fit the technology into that. So it really, all those pieces are critical, and it's all facilitated by having business expertise, people who've run big companies, run small companies, understand the marketing and sales side of things. And no one person has all of that. And so it always comes back to a great team.
That's great. Great answers. Great interview. So, well, we have a fair number of eye care practitioners who listen in on the podcast and watch the video. The vast majority are actually investors and strategics. So if someone, after hearing this, sees the opportunity, as I see it, wants to get in touch with you, how can they best reach you?
I can give you my email and my phone number.
Be great.
It's barry.linder@eyedetec.com and 650-224-1604. Just give me a call.
Wonderful. Well, Barry, really appreciate this. It was a concise but valuable interview. A lot of great information. I congratulate you on getting to where you're at with such an exciting technology that truly differentiates itself. And all the work you put in is finally getting to a great point. And so I look forward to seeing your continued success. And I thank you for sharing so many things with our listeners today.
Thank you, Paul. Those are great words coming from someone with your background. Thank you.
You.